Anyhow, my name is Pasquale. I'm the co-chair of Ontario Place for All, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about Ontario Place redevelopment, conflicting public and private visions, and walk you through the past, present, and future of Ontario Place. It's a site that's very much kind of in question right now. So we are fighting for a public future against those who would want a private future at Ontario Place. So, who is Ontario Place for All? We are a grassroots, completely volunteer-run organization like you, like Civic Tech Toronto, with well over 30,000 supporters who want to make sure that Ontario Place redevelopment follows core principles of waterfront revitalization. I am one of the co-chairs. The other co-chair is not here tonight, but I'm here to represent the group. Our steering committee members include experts in architecture, law, urban design, heritage, and generally concerned Ontarians with what's coming with Ontario Place. So far, we've successfully defended the Trillium Park, the Sinisphere, and the Pods from destruction, and I'll talk more about that going forward. And we've pressed every level of government to fight for a public Ontario Place over the past, since 2019, kind of when this whole situation got started, which I will walk you through in detail. So our core principles, we believe Ontario Place must be for everyone and kept publicly accessible to everyone. And thoroughly consult the public. This is Ontario's place. You should consult Ontarians before you move forward with any major changes to this site, which was meant to be a place that celebrates and reflects Ontarians and acts as a backyard for every Ontarian. That is the vision. And further to that, Bill Davis, who was a PC premier, said it really well. He said, public interest, not commercial interest, has to drive the vision of Ontario Place. And we'll see when public interest drives the vision that things go well, and when commercial interest drives the vision, things don't go so well. So Ontario Place's origin story. So I'm an avid comic book reader, so I like talking about origin stories. So this is Ontario Place's origin story. So, in 1967, Torontonians were really disconnected from their waterfront. It was kind of an industrial site, lots of lake fill, various industrial uses like Tip Top, cigarette manufacturers, not so nice. So, and Canada had just celebrated their centennial. If you think 1867, 1967. So that's the context, a lot of kind of Canadian pride and a lot of, pride in Ontario. Montreal just held Expo 67, on that centennial. So there was a lot of, sort of civic pride that bubbled up from that. And Ontario was kind of in response to Expo 67, wanted to have a site that all Ontarians could be proud of. So this was one of the very first I guess, mock-ups of what Ontario Place could be. And they called it an emerald necklace. So you can kind of imagine a little bit of a necklace of islands around the waterfront to reconnect us to the waterfront and kind of act like Toronto Islands, but on the land side. So it's a place where you can kind of step onto an island without having to go to Toronto Islands. And, when you're on the waterfront, instead of being faced with a concrete barrier, you're faced with beautiful forests that were meant to sort of reflect Ontario forests and just have a place to unwind and relax, take a break from city living. So Ontario Place opened in 1971. You can see some of the original sort of plan here. So a children's village opened then, and this was done by a playground creator called Eric McMillan. And it was such a success that he did playgrounds like this all over the world. Anybody who is from this vintage will tell you that they went in there and maybe got a little injured, but had a great time. Other things I'll highlight is the Sinisphere up in the corner. So this was IMAX's very first installation. And IMAX is an amazing movie technology company and, a Canadian company. And this was their very first sort of permanent installation at Sinisphere. And as you all probably know, IMAX is like a huge success now all around the world. So this was also a great place to incubate Ontario talent. And we saw a lot of that in the original vision here. While we celebrate and reflect Ontario, we also incubate Ontario talent and celebrate Ontarians and their successes. And then, unfortunately, a later government felt, oh, gee, we need to monetize this park. And I don't hear about people monetizing High Park. I don't know why it just keeps coming back to this here. But they felt it should become an amusement park. Now, you can imagine what it would be like for Ontario Place to try to compete against Canada's Wonderland. They got killed, simply put. And there used to be a beautiful concert stage here called the Forum with a rotating stage, and everybody of a certain vintage has seen like the most incredible bands play there. And it got cut down for the Molson Amphitheater, which in effect cut Ontario Place in half, which kind of diminished the kind of connected site experience for those who like wanted to use it as an amusement park. You could enjoy the water slides and stuff, and then you had to kind of walk over to this area over here. So it kind of created a disjointed experience, when the Forum was just demolished and replaced with Budweiser stage. I will admit I go to a lot of concerts there, and there's been some good shows. But it's just another sort of private decision inside a public space and how those kind of interplay with each other. So, through that amusement park, Ontario Place was losing a lot of money because, it costs a lot of money to run an amusement park and you can't compete with Canada's Wonderland. So eventually it loses so much money that the Ontario government in 2012 decides to close Ontario Place. But, after doing some studies and various things, they reopened it in a spectacular way with Trillium Park. Can I get a show of hands of anybody who's been to Trillium Park yet? Oh, wow. Hey, you guys get around. Good stuff. It's a great new park. It's like some of the best that we have to offer in landscape architecture. Like as you walk through, there's incredible views. There's a hole in a rock, and if you look through it, you see the CN Tower. It's a great place to jog and cycle. And, there's like a kind of a rocky area that my kid loves to parkour at top speed. And I think he's going to, get, not do too well, but he somehow makes it through. It's an amazing site for a family and anybody just to enjoy themselves outside. And even after years of neglect, Ontario Place is still really well loved. Like there's a beach here that people would go swimming 365 days a year. It's a pebble beach and it's on West Island at the very south end of it. And it was designed by landscape architect Michael Huff 50 years ago, and it still looks roughly the same. Like it was built in a way to kind of harden it against the elements, but pebble beaches are quite clean. Like, you can kind of sit on the rocks and you're not getting like covered in sand. So it's a very popular spot, and the people, they would be swimming there today if West Island was open today. They're literally there every day of the year. You can see some sort of forest views. Like I spoke to a young man where he says when he goes jogging into Ontario Place, West Island, he forgets he's in Toronto, and like he's up at a cottage or out on an island. It is wellness as it is right now. Fast forward to 2019, the Ontario government, without consulting Ontarians, went to a secret bid with the scoring that we can't see, no fairness monitor, and they selected two winning bidders. One is Austrian mega spa company Therme, and the other is the Molson Amphitheater, but the amphitheater is just going to get bigger and be all 4 seasons. So, and what we have, like in terms of what we have in detail right now, we have the mega spa application. So that's really where we're focusing our attention. As I mentioned before, I have a bit of a soft spot for the Budweiser stage, but there's a lot of problems with the mega spa, which I'll detail now. So this is the proposed private mega spa in its first iteration. And for those who don't know about renderings, there are lies, damn lies, and then architect renderings. Just so we're all clear on that. And then this is the reality, like, where we had this entire island to walk around and see like a forest that reflect kind of Ontario and, just places to relax and just calmly read a book. Now we're just left with a sliver of public space around what is a very big building. Size-wise, it's roughly the same as BMO Field. So what you're going to get is if you've ever exited the Skywalk to Ripley's Aquarium, like you're on a public sidewalk, but you're very aware that there's a very big building, that's right next to you. So to me, this is not like, peaceful public space. It's the same public space that you might have on a street somewhere or something, right? Like it's just kind of a sliver of public space around this spa. Another issue we have is they've done environmental assessments of this part of Ontario Place that is, kind of colorful. And then these grayed out areas, they are not going to do an environmental assessment. And the big problem with that is this is where the most egregious work is being done. They're going to cut down 850 trees, every single tree, all the vegetation on West Island, all of the special lagoons and all the great landscape architect Michael Huff did. It's all going to be erased for a giant glass mega spa. And then they're going to lake fill all around it to create a little sliver of public space around the spa. And this right now is home to over 100 species of bird and animal. You can go down there and see beavers, foxes, every bird species you can imagine. And they're all going to be displaced. And of all the places not to do an environmental assessment, this is for sure the most urgent place to do an environmental assessment before you go in and ruin the habitat for over 100 species of bird and animal. Also size, I referred to this earlier, roughly 13 stories. The architect who's building it admitted it's about the size of BMO Field. So it's really going to dominate views of the Sinosphere and the pods, like the really special parts of Ontario Place if you're on the land side. So we think the scale is, it's definitely too much. Taxpayer-funded parking lot. So we learned as part of the contract with the Megaspa company that they promised them a parking lot within 650 meters of their door. So they're going to build a taxpayer-funded underground parking lot, 2,100 spaces at a taxpayer cost of roughly $450 million. And this is in the context of, you know, if you go up here, you're going to have the Ontario line, TTC, GO, you know, your cycle paths, and there are 6,000 parking spots at the X. So we're viewing this site, like, unfortunately, in a silo. Like, you know, they're not considering the X, which is right above it with 6,000 spots. So between that and the cost of the site servicing, it's $650 million in taxpayer money. And I haven't got to another expense, which I'm going to detail in a minute. But, you know, we have obviously a big issue with this. Like, we're supposed to be fighting climate change, not installing like one of the largest parking lots in North America. I touched on the trees. Every single tree on West Island will be cut. All of these red dots represent a tree to be cut down. In total in the site, they're going to cut down 1,500 trees, which, you know, it's very hard to grow trees in an urban setting, and it's twice as hard to grow them on the waterfront because they are battered by the elements constantly. So, you know, only really robust trees can survive in that situation. So replacing it with what Walter Kemp called lollipop trees is not a good answer. So they say, oh, well, we're going to replace all the trees with new ones we're planting. Well, these cute little lollipop trees don't do much to fight climate change, and they may not survive. This is a bit of the build form. Suffice to say, if you're on the land side over here, you're not going to be aware that there's a Sinosphere over here. So, you know, kind of blocking those heritage views that even the Ontario government has admitted are important. The building is built to accept a maximum of 14,000 people per day. So quite a scale. You know, the Waterfront Design Review panel called it a very large cottage on a very little island. Seems like a misfit. We've learned that the lease for the Megaspa is 95 years. Not great. This means we're giving up this space for our children, our children's children, for generations. It's going to be a private space. And yeah, I think maybe the final piece of bad news, they're going to demolish the Science Center, the existing Science Center, and move a diminished one down to Ontario Place. So about a third of the size. We're going to lose the rainforest, the kids section, and the planetarium as part of this, and shove it downtown where it doesn't work for the majority of students. And the cost $400 million more of taxpayer money. So suffice to say, we don't like the idea. But, you know, when Ontario Place will always say we're against this idea, people naturally will ask, well, what are you for? And so we put together a concept to try to restart the consultation on a good note, and that's called a better idea. So we want to leverage, we think it's a better idea. We want to leverage, you know, the cultural and natural assets on both sides. So this is the Ontario line. It starts at the Ontario Science Center, and that's what that station is named, and ends at Ontario Place. On this side, we have, you know, we have the Don River Valley, and over here we have, you know, Toronto's waterfront. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunity there to enhance amazing natural and cultural public assets, you know, and create 21st century public spaces. So, you know, when we think about these sites, some of our best architects were commissioned to build them. So we have Eb Zeidler at Ontario Place, Michael Huff doing all the landscape architecture at Ontario Place, and of course, Raymond Moriyama, who designed the Ontario Science Center and nestled it so beautifully into a ravine. What we think is we should enhance what's there instead of destroying it and replacing it with private interests. So let's build on that legacy. Let's enhance the West Island, you know, use Trillium Park as a proof of concept. We costed out, if you basically did Trillium Park all across Ontario Place, you're looking at about $70 million, which we think tracks very well against, you know, roughly $1 billion in taxpayer money for the mess that they plan to create at Ontario Place. You know, so yeah, the idea too is to maybe leverage the pods to kind of teach about Ontario's history, maybe integrate First Nations history, teach about Ontario's history, highlight, some amazing Ontario technology, highlight some stuff from various Ontario museums, just make it a place that celebrates and reflects Ontario, which was always the vision for this site. So another thing, I don't know why, but we always think of the X and Ontario Place as completely separate, like in silos. They're right next to each other. So it just makes sense to build some great cycling tracks all the way down to the waterfront, things like connecting opportunities around Dufferin, Strawn, and just really bring people down to Ontario Place really easily through lots of new, cycling tracks. As I was mentioning, Trillium Park is an amazing site, and we could totally just do that right across Ontario Place. And, I think when you start with that public interest, there are commercial fits that can work within that context, like amazing restaurants, maybe like new places like the Forum that focus on Ontario music. Could we find some Ontario technology that we could showcase here? Oh, definitely, yeah. These are, I think, the things that really fit well at Ontario Place. I'm thinking of places like Chicago's Millennium Park, Montreal's waterfront as like really successful places that kind of find that balance well. So we compare the better idea to the private mega spa, and in our totally unbiased opinion, we come right out on top. On the Science Center side of things, like this is a very special building. Like I don't know of any other building that really works its way through a ravine the way that this does. While showcasing like, technology and science, it's such an interesting interplay between those things. And, going on a ravine walk here, it's extremely special. It's absolutely worth doing. It's a very special ravine. This is obviously an important part of the community, and these are three of the things that we're going to lose in the new science center: the rainforest, the kids section, and the planetarium sort of activities, because they've recognized that this way smaller science center simply doesn't fit these things. So, we have an issue in Toronto. We need housing. And I think, even in our better idea concept that the table land, which is currently, the city is currently using for parking lots, we're going to need a lot less of those once the subway stops like right here. So why not reuse that in housing? I think we estimate that we could build about 1,000 housing units on this kind of table land, which is currently being used for parking lots. The Ontario government has talked about tearing down the Science Center and building condos right there. You'd never get permission. I'll tell you a secret. The Toronto TRCA would never have approved the Science Center today because it's built like in a ravine, which they call them hazard lands. Hurricane Hazel like destroyed a swath of West Toronto through flooding. So a land like this can't support a condo because it is in a floodplain. So we can leverage places like the parking lots for housing, but where the Science Center is right now, you'd never be permitted to build anything there. It's simply like, sensitive land and a hazard land as well. So yeah, we imagine new public spaces here, lots of housing opportunities, connections to the housing that's being built on this side, make it really easy for people to get to the Science Center and explore the ravine, new cycle paths, just rethinking it as a 21st century public space, because both Ontario Place and the Science Center have been neglected over the years by various governments. So it's time to definitely rethink them. They need revitalization, but they should stay public. So of course, our very unbiased scorecard scores us very high here as well. Tearing down Ontario Science Center, the architect there, Raymond Moriyama, said they used concrete meant to last 250 years that the Ontario Science Center was maintained properly. So that building has a lot of life left. And tearing that down is a disaster for the amount of embodied carbon that would be released. Really, for something that doesn't make sense. That building has a lot of life left. It just needs investment. Considering we actually commissioned a study considering public versus private costs when you're rethinking like privatizing public spaces. And if you decide on commercial uses, there's a risk that thing's going to fail. This Austrian mega spa company has been around for 10 years. Are we going to care about spas in 30, 40 years? I don't know. There's a risk that business will fail. Then what comes next? Like, some people have sort of nervously said maybe a casino, who knows? But a public space, can maintain that same use, and it doesn't need that same investment cycle. We've really let the Science Center in Ontario Place run for that 50-year period, really without the government investing very much. I'm sure they wouldn't be proud to admit that, but it's true. they haven't necessarily invested a lot in these sites. So, in a public use, you might have a 20, 30-year lifespan, but for public space uses, it can go on and on. Like think of Toronto's Harbourfront Centre, which is about 50 years old as well. This is another vision for Ontario Place that came out of design competition in 2020. It's called Mega Landscape. And they just envision this as a public space that continually changes depending on consultations and the public's input. And sort of continuing here, this is Dufferin, and they're imagining a cycle track right into Ontario Place from Dufferin, as well as one from Parkside, and extending the islands out. Which, sure, I don't know, more islands might not be bad. Yeah, so this is an interesting vision, and just we're actually taking part in a design competition at Toronto Metropolitan University in March. And I would love to hear other people's thoughts for this space. Even our concept of better idea, the point of it is to restart consultation. We don't suggest it as an endpoint, but Ontarians deserve to be consulted on like our most important cultural heritage sites, the things that really kind of make Ontario Ontario. So really that's kind of what we want you all to get out of this. And I would love to hear your visions for Ontario Place in the Science Center. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. If there's any questions, I thank you very much, Civic Tech Toronto, for hosting me tonight. It's been a real pleasure.